Hello. Um, I just wanted to let you guys know that I've got a new editing software. So the I've upgraded my thing. So before I was using this built-in video editor that was just on my computer anyway. It's pretty simple and basic and wasn't really that great, to be honest. It was quite limiting. So yeah, now I've upgraded to Wondershare Filmora 11. It's so much more powerful, so much better, and it lets me do a lot more things with my videos. So for the next few videos and stuff, I'm going to be experimenting a bit with the different things that you can sort of do as I get used to the new editing software. So yeah. And anyway, enough of that. I'll enjoy the review. Hello. Today I'm going to be reviewing Thor: Love and Thunder. Now today I don't want to go too much into the whole plot. I'll just give you a very brief rundown of what happens. So essentially we have this guy named Gorr who prays for his daughter to be saved by his god, but his daughter dies, and then he meets this god later on and thinks that he's gonna now get the eternal reward of or something for meeting him now, and the god laughs at him and demeans him and is just a general dick. And then Gorr is getting choked by the god, and there's this sword which can kill gods, and it's conveniently lying there on the ground, and it appears in Gorr's hand, and he uses it to kill this god, and then he vows to kill all gods. So essentially the villain goes around killing gods for a bit and eventually comes across Thor, and as well as Thor, Odin's son, we have the mighty Thor, who is Jane Foster, because she's able to be Thor now because she was summoned by Mjolnir. So she wields Mjolnir, while Thor, Odin's son, still has Stormbreaker. They go around and there's some hijinks and stuff. Korg and Valkyrie are there. They later go to the Shadow Realm and fight Gorr, and there's this whole big battle scene, and eventually Gorr steals Stormbreaker, which he needs to open the door to Eternity, who's the oldest god or something, and if you reach Eternity, he will grant you one wish. So the Thors have to stop him from reaching Eternity, because then he can just wish all the gods into non-existence or something. I'll dive a bit more into the ending later when I talk about Gorr. Now I'm going to talk about what I liked about this movie first. I really liked the villain, Gorr. Now, his introduction was it was a bit silly, and it's just very contrived, I think, that he just happens to stumble across his god, and there just happens to be this sword that can kill gods. But overall, I liked the villain. He had a twisted way of seeing the world, and he wanted to kill all the gods because he thought they were cruel and bad. And I mean, he is sort of right. We do meet some of the gods later on, including Zeus from Greek mythology, and yeah, they're kind of assholes. If you're familiar at all with mythology in general, especially Greek mythology, most gods are assholes. At the end, he manages to actually make it to Eternity, and he gets his one wish. Before he makes his wish, though, he talks to Thor, and he and Thor kind of have a little bit of a chat, and he convinces Gorr to, instead of wishing away all the gods, to instead bring his daughter back. Gorr is concerned because he's dying, and he's like, oh, there's gonna be no one left for her. But then the Thors sort of silently agree to look after her. So he wishes his daughter back, and then he dies. I did like his whole sort of story and arc. However, I feel like it wasn't given enough development and screen time. It's really a case where I think he was pretty good, but he wasn't quite developed as much as he perhaps should have been. But I mean, his motivations do make sense, and his change of heart at the end also sort of makes sense. So that's pretty good. The whole scene in the Shadow Realm where Thor, Jane, Valkyrie, and Korg all meet Gorr is really good. So it's pretty cool because they go to the Shadow Realm, and like as they're nearing it, all the color fades away and it becomes black and white, which is a really cool visual design. So it goes all black and white. However, there's like an aura of color sort of around some of the weapons, because everyone here's got like, you know, a unique powerful weapon like Stormbreaker and Mjolnir, and they end up getting Zeus's Thunderbolt as well. But anyway, there's this whole big scene here where they're running around the Shadow Realm, and that's when they find out that the key to open eternity is actually the Bifrost, which Stormbreaker can use. So they throw Stormbreaker away, and then Gorr captures our heroes, and we get a chance for him to sort of talk to each of the heroes there. The scene is really creepy, really well done, and it does wonders for fleshing out Gorr. This is really the main scene, I feel, that propels Gorr into being, you know, somewhat of a good villain. Anyway, after a while, Gorr is slowly trying to kill Jane, but then to try and get Thor to summon Stormbreaker so Gorr can take it. And eventually Thor does summon it, and then there's a big fight. So all of our heroes fight against Gorr and his shadow monsters, which he can summon for some reason. Anyway, there's a big fight, and Valkyrie gets stabbed. So then they decide to leave. So they summon the Bifrost and get everyone out of there. But when that happens, Gorr comes in and ends up stealing Stormbreaker from them. So then all of our heroes land back in Asgard without Stormbreaker. And don't worry, Valkyrie's fine. She just needs to rest up, and she's out of action for the rest of the film. Now, there's a scene not long after this where Thor and Jane sort of talk. No, I haven't mentioned this, but Jane is actually dying of cancer in this film. She's got stage 4 cancer, and she sort of got drawn to Mjolnir, and she's sort of thinking that it can like help her a bit, like kind of heal her. And Thor and Jane sort of have a bit of a discussion about, because Thor doesn't want her to come along with him to fight Gorr again, because he doesn't want to lose Jane. Jane wants to fight because she feels like this is important and what she's meant to be doing. Overall, it's a really good scene, this discussion that they have. It's really good. Anyway, that's what I liked about this film. But there are some things I didn't like about this film, which I'm going to be talking about now. Now, I'll stick with Thor and Jane for a little bit. It's revealed to us that Thor and Jane were actually in a more serious relationship at some point. Now, this hasn't been shown to us in any of the previous films. Based on the timeline, it would probably have to be between Thor the Dark World and Age of Ultron. After the first Thor movie, Thor ghosts Jane until Thor the Dark World. And as far as I'm aware, after Age of Ultron, Thor's searching the galaxy for Infinity Stones or some other nonsense, and he doesn't come back to Earth for a while. So the only time it could really be is between Thor the Dark World and Age of Ultron. And I didn't really like this. Like, I mean, sure, it's great that they had a relationship, but why have we never seen this? The movies so far have not portrayed them as ever having had a really serious relationship. Like, they had their little thing in the first four, but then they've not really been around much. I don't know. Maybe there's some dialogue explaining it that I've not remembered from some of the films. I'm not sure what's going on. Anyway, I didn't like that. It took me a bit out of the film because it was. I just got stuck thinking, well, when did this happen? What? Action scenes. This movie had a lot of action scenes. None of them were very good, though. They ranged from bad to just average. I mean, no, I don't know if any of them were really that bad, but none of them were. They weren't anything really. They were just sort of there. They were just boring and pointless, and they didn't add much of anything. See, the fight scene in the Shadow Realm, that was pretty good. That's probably the best one. But then there's also like the opening one, and there's this one in New Asgard. There's this one in Omnipotent City, or whatever it is. It's a place where all the gods are. And they're just all sort of meh. They didn't really add a whole lot. They were just sort of there for the visuals, I guess, and for the excitement, but that's not what excites me. It needs, something of more substance. That's what's really exciting about stories, not just flashy action scenes. The one in the Shadow Realm was pretty good, though. See, it's probably one of the most visually distinct because it's of the whole black and white thing. And it's on this like tiny little planet that's where you can really see how round everything is. But the main reason it was so good is because it actually had stakes and it actually had consequences. Because it's after that fight that Valkyrie's knocked out for the rest of the film. Jane is sort of also knocked out for a bit. She, her cancer starts getting her down really bad. But she does eventually come back for the final fight. And Humour. Yeah. This movie was not very funny. I just have to say it. See, I have mixed opinions on Thor Ragnarok, which I'll probably dive into in a more in-depth video later down the track. See, I have a lot of opinions on Thor's whole arc throughout the MCU, and it's something that I could probably talk about at quite a length. I'm not quite ready to tackle that subject, so I'm going to put a pin in that. But one day down the track, I do want to create a more in-depth video talking about Thor and probably talking about all the films that he's in and his overall arc. And when I do that, I'll probably touch on my opinions of Ragnarok a bit more then. What I will say now, though, is despite my problems with Ragnarok, I can't refute that it is a funny film. It is very funny and quite comedic.
I'm particularly fond of these. I pulled them out of a place on Midgard called Texas.
So even though I have issues with it, I do enjoy the humour. I do find it funny. This movie, however, was not funny. There were like a couple things that were funny in the whole movie, but as a whole, most of the jokes were they just fell flat. I don't know. It just wasn't that funny. So remember the theatre thing in Thor Ragnarok where they had, these actors recreating the time that Loki died in Thor the Dark World? That was a pretty good moment. It was kind of funny. You know, it was a good little joke, but it also sort of made sense. Well, they do that again in this movie. It was funny in Thor Ragnarok. It was not funny in this one. They've already done that joke. The joke's been done. You can't just do the same joke again. Like, really? For those of you curious, the scene they recreate in the theatre is when Odin dies and then Hel shows up. Now, there's a lot of jokes, like a constant barrage of jokes about these magical weapons and their relation to Thor in particular. See, Thor's sort of like jealous because he wants Mjolnir, but now Mjolnir is with Jane, and I guess Stormbreaker doesn't like that. And there's all these jokes about the hammer and the axe and all the other weapons, and none of them were funny. It got old really quick. And they just keep making jokes about these weapons. Apparently, they're either like meant to be pets or like lovers, based on what the jokes suggest. Yeah. So I don't know. The jokes got old real quick. Also, apparently Thor can ride a Stormbreaker like a witch's broom, which is not something I thought he could do with it. But there you go. And yes, it looked extremely silly. At the end of the movie, Jane dies. I don't know, it didn't have too much emotion in it for me, personally. I wasn't really too invested in it, to be honest. Like, I liked some of the scenes with Jane and Thor, but overall, the whole thing didn't really excite me too much. But then they have this end credit scene right at the end where they show Jane like being reconstituted in Valhalla, and she turns around and meets Heimdall. Oh my god. Why? Why do you have to do that? Now, this is a really, personal belief of mine, but I don't think that characters should be brought back when they die. I think death is a very, very significant thing, and it should be treated as such in fiction. There are a few tropes that sort of trivialize death, which I cannot stand. Fake out deaths, I can't stand them. Character resurrections, can't stand them, hate them. Going into this, I was kind of expecting to have this big rant about character resurrections because I thought Loki would come back like he does in all of the bloody movies. But what do you know, he didn't. I was shocked when he didn't come back to life. But yeah, I wasn't expecting them to show like the afterlife. Now, technically, that's not a character resurrection if she's in the afterlife. But showing characters who have died after they have died, it kind of defeats the purpose of killing them off in the first place. And the fact that they show us the afterlife leads me to believe that perhaps there's a way out of this afterlife in the future, which is something that I do not want to see, because I do not want these characters to come back to life. Because, as I said, death is a significant thing and should be treated as such, and I don't believe that characters should come back. I was immensely sad when Heimdall died. Like, Heimdall is probably one of my favourite characters from the Thor films. And when he was just killed by Thanos at the start of Infinity War, that was that was something that saddened me in that movie. But I don't want him to come back because he's gone. And if he comes back, like, it kind of defeats the purpose of killing him off in the first place. I know I'm ranting a bit about a character resurrection and they didn't even do it, but I think they're up to something. They've showed the afterlife. They're up to something. On the topic of deaths, I'll probably touch on this more in that big Thor video I was talked about earlier. But they sort of recap all the people who've died that are close to Thor, including the Warriors 3. They're not referred to as name. Korg is telling the story and he's like saying, oh, Thor lost his mother and his father. And he's like, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy. Which I think is a fairly accurate representation of what Taika Waititi did to those characters. He butchered them just because I just don't think he liked them, to be honest, which is completely unfair. Like, I'm not saying you can't kill them off. Like, you want to kill them off, sure, that's fine, but they didn't. Their deaths didn't affect Thor at all, or at least it hasn't been shown that way in any film. Thor hasn't even mentioned these characters, I don't think, since Thor: The Dark World. He didn't mention them in the movie that they died in. Like, seriously? They were like his best friends in the first one, and although they had a much more minor role in the second movie, they were still in it and still did some things and helped him out. But yeah, then Taika Waititi comes in and he's like, oh yeah, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. And Sif, she wasn't even in Ragnarok. She does return in this one for like 5 seconds. Thor finds her on this planet, in this like little battlefield area. And apparently she fought Gorr and she's like missing an arm. And she's excited because, she's can go to Valhalla now that she's died in battle. And Thor's like, well, you survived the battle, so if you die now, you're not really going to Valhalla. And she's like, oh, shit. And then I honestly can't even remember what happened to her after that, because, I don't know, did they take her back? Is she in New Asgard now, or do they leave her? I honestly don't know, because the movie didn't bother to give her any more screen time or any more mention. It's just so dismissive. These characters were important in the first 2 Thor movies, but I don't think Taika Waititi had any interest or care for them whatsoever, and it frustrates me. Speaking of Taika Waititi, he plays Korg in this film, and I just have to say that Korg is just... he serves no purpose in this film. He's purely there because Taika Waititi likes him. He doesn't serve any relevance to the plot or the story. He doesn't even have like funny dialogue like he did in Ragnarok. Like in Ragnarok, he was actually funny. He had good lines of dialogue.
How'd you end up in here?
Oh, well, I tried to start a revolution but didn't print enough pamphlets.
In this movie, he doesn't have anything funny to say. He's just sort of there. And there's this whole bit in the middle where he gets like crumbled into a pile of rocks, and then he's like only a head. He's like, it's only his head gets carried around for a bit, and then later on he gets reformed and he grows his body back. And it's just so pointless. Like, why? He doesn't do anything in the film. Like, he's just there. Valkyrie, at least, actually, has some heart-to-heart conversations with Jane, and she serves a much greater role in actually fighting against Gorr. It seems to be getting a bit darker here now, hasn't it? Anyway, that's my review of Thor: Love and Thunder. And apparently I also sort of talked a bit about Ragnarok. So, yeah, I just couldn't help myself. I have a lot of opinions about the Thor films, and I do not like what Taika Waititi has done to them. I will cover Thor's whole thing in a more in-depth video at a later date, and I'll go more in depth into my opinions on Ragnarok there. And I'll also probably talk about the ending of this film there. But yeah, don't expect this video to come out anytime soon. It's gonna be long time away, I can tell you. Anyway, would I recommend this film? I guess. Like, I know I ranted a lot. It wasn't necessarily a bad film. It was a bit hit and miss for me. I would say don't, if you haven't been to the cinema to watch it yet, just don't bother with the cinema. Just watch it on like DVD or a streaming site when it comes out on that. I don't think it's worth a trip to the cinemas. However, I don't necessarily think it's a bad film. I think it's more just an average one. And yeah, a lot of my issues sort of stem from how Thor has been in the MCU as a whole. So yeah, I'll elaborate on that in that future video I keep mentioning. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.